to talk about the future and potential of VR. I'm joined here in the Beijing studio by Mr. Huang, former Managing Director of Intel China. Welcome, sir. Also joining us in the studio, Andy Mok, founder and CEO of Red Pagoda. Both of you are actually entrepreneurs now from China. Let me ask you about this. 1990s, VR didn't do very well. It was making a splash, but eventually didn't come into being. Now, a revival of the wave, will that be different, Mr. Huang?
I think the reason in the 90s it didn't doing well is because the technology is not ready yet in terms of like the screen and processing power is not there, screen is not very good, user experience is not very good as well. So that's why it's failed. This time I think technology is much better. It's actually the ride the waves of smartphones. Mm-hmm. Like you look at the screen and the smartphone screens are really good. The processing power is much more powerful and also battery usage is much longer. User experience and is also better. So I think this time people may see more reality in VR than 20 years ago.
What do you make of it, Mr. Mok? What do you think are some of the most important factors that would make one type of technology eventually become the mainstream?
Well, I think clearly it's finding a killer use case that millions, if not billions of people will want to use.
Right.
And I think that both for virtual reality and augmented reality, I think that time, if not is here, is very close.
We have already seen quite a number of pieces of experiments. Not only, documentaries at Sundance Movie Festival, there are quite a number of the VR movies already there. And also New York Times, for example, recently published a whole set of photos illustrating the Syrian migrant crisis, eventually using the VR technology. We've also seen that in China as well. But the question is, what is likely to be the cost? And will the cost eventually serve the mass market? We got technology, as you mentioned, getting ever more mature. So what about the cost? And what about the eagerness and momentum among industries to jump on this?
I think the cost is coming down quite dramatically. Since a lot of hardware actually shared by smartphone industry, because as we know, smartphone has actually cost coming down as well. Now we see in the VR devices, like head-mounted devices, in the U.S. selling for about $600 US, mm-hmm. And I think that is quite accessible, and it's for lots of people.
Right. The thing is, how it's likely to transform our life. That is really fascinating. As a journalist, I was thinking when I was watching recently a VR video, how it's likely to transform my assignment. I would put everyone in the same story with me when I'm going, let's just say, to Iraq or to Syria or even just to outside Beijing. You can experience the story as if it's happening around you. So how much will that transform various sectors and the way people look at ourselves?
Well, I think VR and AR actually are profoundly transformational at every sector of the value chain. So first of all, we look at enterprises, the ability to do things more efficiently through better training, through business models, things like that.
Right.
But from the consumer perspective, as you were saying, virtual reality, because it's immersive, has the ability to profoundly affect the viewer or the participant, both at the cognitive as well as the emotional and the gut level as well.
I think two things that the VR did and quite revolutionary. One is the interaction. All the previous entertainment, it's not much of interaction. Not the VR, we can participate, as Andy just mentioned. Second thing is they customize it. And previously, if you watch a movie, you have to follow whatever director direct the movie.
Right.
With the VR and AR, you actually can choose whatever the path you want to be. You want to participate. You can set up your own options this way or that way. So these two things, I think, is quite revolutionary.
But on the other hand, will that make all the kinds of industries being transformed? For example, if you have VR technology back at home, you wouldn't choose to go to theaters anymore because it's the same experience anyway.
You're absolutely right. I think it's probably going to have a disruptive an impact to one is the TV industry, another one is movie theater industry. Because you think about that, when we make the screen bigger, and then if you wanted to really have enhanced and viewing, you need a lot of processing powers.
Yes.
And also if you want to see the surrounding you, and you have, you can imagine how big the screen it could be. So that's is a disadvantage in my opinion. With the VR and AR, and then the screen size is quite small, the computation power is quite manageable, cost is also lower.
Yes.
So I think it will have a disruptive impact to the TV industry and the theater and the industry as well.
As disruptive as Mr. Huang just illustrated, Mr. Mark?
I think so. I do think so.
Okay, well, there's several things that we really need to discuss when it comes to VR. The technology is there. You say the technology, the price of it is also coming down, but headset is still a big business. Well,
Yeah.
at the same time, it could be expensive to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So what is the potential of that? And how is that related to the fate of VR?
I think the estimate, some analysts give estimates, say in about 10 years, the VR industry just on hardware and software side could be somewhere around like from 23 billion US dollar to over 200 billion
Right.
US dollars. For comparison, today, the notebook and the business is about 150 billion or less, 110 billion, and actually the desktop is around 60 billion dollar. The TV whole industry is about 100 billion US dollars. As we can imagine, in 10 years, VR could be at the size of today's TV industry or even computing and industry as a whole.
This sounds very familiar to me, Mr. Huang, what you have just said. Just in 10 years, one could imagine certain kind of technology could be some kind of industry today. So, but we've been hearing those kind of things, and yet not necessarily everything is being realized, Mr. Mark. So therefore, my question once again, how workable really is this VR technology? For example, when it comes to headsets, when it comes to different parts of the technology, and how will that be accepted by the mass market? Will that be a gradual approach, or this is likely to be a floodgate opening?
Well, I think that when we look at the major technologies, for instance, desktop computing, when Bill Gates said back in the 70s, a computer on every desktop, the internet, despite the internet.com bust, smartphones, Steve Jobs' vision,
Right.
These all did come true. And I think that we're looking at VR and AR as a similar, profoundly transformational type of technology. And we only need to look at not only where the smart money is going, but the smart people. So quick example, Magic Leap, a company in the US, raised $500 million in their Series B, including $200 million from Alibaba. And the CEO of Google, Sundar Pichai, is on the board.
Right.
So I think that it shows that some of the smartest investors and tech executives are putting a lot of money and energy into this.
Okay, follow the money, that's really the logic. But on the other hand, whenever we discuss a new technology, Mr. Huang, there's always a possibility whether that's likely to create a further technological divide between the haves and the have-nots. And if we talk about the revolution, transform the industry by VR, that is even more proper question to be asked here. Mr. Huang, what do you make of it?
I think you ask an excellent question. And previously on this program, you asked multiple times, say, like e-commerce, whether it does really create jobs, etc. And we seem to notice a lot of technology development seems to, as you mentioned, and enlarge the gap of the society, polarize the workforce. Maybe this time is different. Maybe VR is a solution
What
for
do you
that.
mean by maybe? What is backing the maybe or the may not be?
I think, for example, and with the VR, you can live like a virtual, like a multi-millionaire's life. For example, you can live in Bill Gates' life without owning his mansion.
All right.
So that's maybe create a harmony to the society. Finally, we find a solution to the problem previously we will notice.
But seriously, I mean, this technological divide, if it has becoming the mainstream, how are we more equipped to find solutions to these divides?
I think we are. Look back, you mentioned some overestimate and also some underestimate. For example, smartphone.
Right.
People actually underestimate the momentum of the smartphone.
At the very beginning.
At the very beginning, the reason is people didn't realize, and the smartphone can sell less than 1,000 RMB. Actually, China started with selling even 500 RMB. Things and VR and AR is right on the wave of smartphone. I expect to see, and these devices can come with much cheaper price, coming down much faster than people anticipated. So maybe it can take off and much faster than people anticipated.
Social impact of technologies.
Yeah. Well, I think 2 points to that. As Jay was mentioning, first that the cost could actually be subsidized when you look at how the wireless carriers essentially give away the phones for the subscription, so that could drive mass adoption, which would have a social impact. But I think another interesting point is when we think about polarization or exacerbating income disparities, a cynical or paranoid person might think that VR could be the opiate of the masses, and that it could keep people happy without really realizing how bad the real situation is.
It isn't necessarily a good thing, though. They are going to wake up anyway.
Well, it could also be a step on the way to the matrix as well. So.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Before we go, we've been discussing technological advances, and some has worked out before, and some has once again re-emerged in front of us. But what eventually will be the fate of VR or AR, as both of you have been advocating? What do you think are the major factors eventually going to decide its future?
I think it's going to shape up the entertainment and the industry. And as Andy correctly mentioned, I think the killer app, the usage model, etc.,
yes,
will be the driving force, and for the VR, cost obviously is a major and a factor as well.
So I guess for those audience who have VR technologies, if we are broadcasting in that way, they can just feel they're sitting with us behind this table and put in their opinions, I guess, at the same time. Mr. Mark, what do you make? The fate of this technology, what is dependent on?
Well, I think no one really knows, but an important test will be in this first quarter of 2016 when Microsoft HoloLens begins shipping. And they've devoted a lot of marketing energy to getting developers on board. And we'll see, does this device really live up to its hype? And I think if it does, it'll be a huge catalyst. If not, it'll only be a delay and a speed bump into the eventual universal adoption of VR and AR.
If you had got access to the VR technology and you can make something out of it, what would be your choice?
Well, I personally gravitate more towards, I think, the entertainment side of it. So immersive gaming or interactive types of entertainment.
Jay?
Same. I think the entertainment is probably the first driver.
Well, we're looking forward to the new forms of entertainment, as both of you mentioned. Thank you so much. Andy, Mark, Jay, Huang, thank you for being with us.